The night never truly slept inside Cross Tower. Long after the last polished shoes clicked across marble floors and the final elevator chimed, shut, the building still breathed with silent lights and distant hums of servers whispering through glass walls. At 2 a.m, the city outside was nothing but blurred neon veins, but inside a lone figure moved quietly between the cubicles. Ella Lopez adjusted the weight of her cleaning cart, its wheels squeaking faintly against the glossy tiles. She wore the same faded uniform she had worn for nearly 3 years. The fabric thinned at the elbows, the sleeves carefully folded to her forearms so they would not brush the polished desks. She knew each corner of this tower better than anyone else ever would. The corporate executives came and went in tailored suits and decisive footsteps, but they never noticed the hand that wiped fingerprints off their glass walls or picked up the half-empty coffee cups left behind after late-night strategy sessions. They never saw Ella, not really. She was a shadow moving behind their reflections. She liked it that way most nights. It kept things simple. But tonight, as she steered her cart down the executive hallway, her chest tightened the way it always did when she reached the last door on the right. The brass nameplate gleamed under the dim light. David Cross, Chief Executive Officer. The man at the top of the glass tower. Ella hesitated at the door, glancing down the empty corridor as if someone might catch her. No one ever did. She slipped her master key into the lock and pushed the heavy door open just wide enough for her cart to slide through. The office smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fresh paper. A floor-to-ceiling window framed the skyline behind an enormous mahogany desk that gleamed like a mirror. Ella paused her cart beside the doorway and stood still for a heartbeat. Her gaze drifted to the black leather chair, the center of this empire. She stepped closer. Gently, she wiped away an invisible smudge on the desk's edge, then lowered herself into the chair. It creaked softly under her slight weight. For 5 minutes every night this was hers. She leaned back, eyes fluttering shut. The city lights made halos behind her eyelids. She imagined for a moment what it would be like to sit here for real, to belong here, to be seen. She pulled open the top right drawer carefully and reached inside. Tucked under a stack of unused notepads was a single folded sheet of paper, wrapped neatly in a plastic sleeve to protect it from spilled coffee or careless hands. Her resume, or what was left of it. She unfolded it slowly, letting her fingers trace the faded letters. Bachelor's in Interior Design, 2 years completed before life dragged her somewhere else. A list of small freelance projects scribbled into the margin. Skills she once practiced in borrowed studios and midnight libraries. It was not much. It never felt like enough. But it was hers. She read the same lines every night just to remind herself she had once wanted more than pushing a mop down silent hallways. That maybe she still did. A small cough echoed from the hallway. Ella jumped and quickly refolded the paper, slipping it back into its hiding place. She closed the drawer silently and pushed the chair back into place. Her heart raced in her chest. She knew it was foolish. If anyone found out she lingered here, if they ever saw that hidden page, it would be over. She would lose the small income that kept her and Leo, her son, afloat. But it was a risk she had learned to take. 5 stolen minutes of pretending were worth it. She stood up and pulled her rag from her pocket. Carefully, she wiped away any trace of her touch, the armrests, the polished edge of the drawer, the faint smudge her thumb had left on the glass desktop. She checked the camera mounted in the far corner of the office, its red light a dull, steady eye that mostly stayed dark at this hour. She told herself it probably did not record. Or maybe no one cared enough to check the footage of a cleaning lady doing her job. She tugged her cart closer and began her real work, spraying the desk surface, cleaning the glass panels at the window edge, dusting the bookshelves that lined one wall, heavy with trophies and architectural models of towers that seemed to grow higher with every passing year. Sometimes she paused to study them, the tiny models with their delicate spires and sharp corners. She wondered if David Cross ever sat here at 2 a.m. staring at these same models and wondering if they were worth it, if he ever doubted like she did. But she pushed the thought away. Ella had learned not to imagine people like him doubted anything at all. She finished wiping down the last shelf and straightened a framed photograph she had seen 100 times, David shaking hands with someone at a groundbreaking ceremony. His smile was polite, practiced, his eyes colder than the glass windows he built. She wondered if he would remember her face at all if they ever passed each other in the hallway during daylight. Probably not. She checked her phone tucked deep in her apron pocket, the screen cracked at the corner. Almost 3. She had 4 more floors to clean before sunrise. She gathered her rags and sprays, returning each to its place on the cart. Before she left the office, she paused at the door one last time, letting her eyes linger on the polished desk, the faint outline of her dreams folded small in a drawer no one ever opened. Then she pushed her cart back into the silent hallway, the squeak of the wheels echoing off the glass and steel like a soft promise that no matter how invisible she felt tonight, she would come back tomorrow, and maybe someday she would not have to hide that piece of paper anymore. She would not have to pretend in stolen minutes. Maybe. She did not let herself dream too long. Dreams could be dangerous when you had rent due and a boy with growing feet and a cough that would not quite go away. Ella pressed the door shut behind her, the brass nameplate catching the faint glow of the hallway light. David Cross, Chief Executive Officer. And somewhere above that title, above the weight of glass and power, a quiet hope breathed warm against the cold. Ella walked on her shadow, blending into the sleepless tower. 2 floors above, the same name gleamed from the etched glass of another office door. This one smaller, but with an even clearer view of the city's skyline. David Cross had not left the building at all that night. He rarely did. It was nearly 3 when he leaned back in his chair, the leather stiff under his shoulders, eyes fixed on the blueprint spread across his desk. A new wing for the tower. Another level of glass and steel meant to touch the sky. But his mind wasn't really on the blueprint anymore. He rubbed his thumb against the corner of the page, his jaw set. The numbers did not add up the way they should have. Another missed deadline, another design glitch, another late-night excuse from a team who spoke a little too smoothly behind closed doors. He could feel it all pressing at the back of his skull, the pulse of frustration that came when people failed to see the simplest things because they did not care to look deeper. He hated that more than failure itself. He hated waste. He hated the half-finished ideas that would never stand straight because no one bothered to think 2 steps ahead. His phone buzzed against the glass desktop, snapping him out of the thought. A notification. Security alert. He frowned, leaned forward, and tapped the screen. A grainy feed flickered open from the security camera outside his main office downstairs. A cleaning cart, a slim shadow moving across the polished floors. For a moment he almost closed the window, dismissing it like every other night. But something in the flicker caught him. He tapped to rewind, watching the static frames shift backward until the door cracked open and a woman stepped inside. He paused the feed. There she was, the cleaning girl. He squinted. She was not just working. She was sitting in his chair. His lips parted, surprise flashing across his features before amusement softened the edge of his frustration. He leaned closer, watching her. She did not just sit. She reached into the drawer. She pulled something out and unfolded it with a careful reverence that told him this was not just idle curiosity. David sat back, his mind piecing it together faster than his pulse could keep up. When she finished, she cleaned. She erased every trace like someone trained to vanish. He almost laughed. He should have felt anger and invasion of his space, his privacy. But instead, there was something almost compelling about it. The ghost in the tower, the hands that kept his world spotless sitting in the chair she would never be invited to claim. He closed the feed. He knew her name only because he knew every name on the payroll, at least in the corner of his mind where useful details lived. Ella Lopez. Contract cleaner, 3 years. Never late, never a complaint, never a request. Completely invisible by design. He turned back to the blueprint, but the lines blurred now behind the image of her small, quiet rebellion. He pushed the paper aside and pinched the bridge of his nose. Maybe he should have felt insulted. But instead, the thought stayed with him long after the lights of the city flickered with dawn. By the next evening, he found himself waiting. Not obviously, but when the office lights dimmed and the building's heartbeat shifted from boardrooms to after-hours hums, David lingered. He told himself it was about the blueprint, the numbers that still refused to bend. But his eyes kept drifting to the time. Past midnight, he heard the faint squeak of wheels down the hall. He did not move. He waited, hearing the soft shuffle of cloth against glass, the whisper of a spray bottle. He imagined her routine, how she moved unseen, how she claimed those 5 stolen minutes like someone starving for air. When the quiet settled, he rose from his chair and moved to the darkened hallway. He did not announce himself. He leaned against the frame of his office door, watching through the small gap as she worked. She did not notice him at first. She was humming something under her breath, a tune so soft the words vanished in the empty air. He should have stopped it then, should have said something, but he could not bring himself to break that small pocket of her world. Not yet. When she turned and caught sight of him, the way her shoulders flinched, the rag slipping from her fingers to the polished floor, it struck him somewhere deeper than he expected. She looked terrified for a heartbeat, then resigned like someone waiting for the final blow. David stepped inside slowly, hands in his pockets to soften the shape of his authority. He picked up the rag from the floor and held it out to her. She took it with trembling fingers. Neither spoke. His eyes flicked to the desk, to the drawer he knew held her secret. But he said nothing about it. Instead, he asked the question that surprised them both. "What do you see when you sit here?" Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He waited. Finally, she whispered, "Just possibility." Her voice cracked like she hadn't spoken that truth aloud in years. David nodded once slowly, then stepped back. He did not scold her. He did not threaten her job or order her out. He only said, "Tomorrow this office will still be here. So will I." Then he turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, rag in hand, the stolen moment cracked open by the faintest edge of something she could not yet name. Neither could he. But as he returned to his own floor, the numbers on the blueprint did not seem so heavy anymore. The tower hummed beneath his feet, and for the first time in years, David Cross wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had missed something vital all along. And maybe she had not. The next day dawned gray and sluggish, the kind of sky that threatened rain, but never delivered just enough gloom to press against the tall glass windows of the Cross Tower. Ella moved through her day like nothing had happened, like the stolen moment in his office was just another line she had silently promised herself never to cross again. She kept her head down, mop gliding across marble gloves tugged tight to hide how her hands shook when she thought too hard about how he had looked at her. Not with anger, not with pity. Something else. Something she couldn't name because people like her didn't get to name things like that. After her shift, she rode the service elevator down with the last trash bag of the night. Her sneakers squeaked on the concrete floor of the underground garage. She stepped into the waiting evening drizzle and pulled her thin hoodie tighter around her shoulders. There was no bus this late, so she walked, past shuttered storefronts, flickering neon signs, the scent of fried food and stale cigarettes following her like ghosts. The apartment she shared with her aunt and younger brother sat above a closed laundromat on the edge of the old part of the city. The door stuck when she pushed it open, the hinges swollen with years of paint and rain. Inside, the TV glowed with a late show her brother had fallen asleep to on the couch. She paused long enough to brush his hair from his forehead, turning the volume down so it wouldn't wake him. In the back room, she pulled out her hidden folder, the same one she kept tucked in the drawer where no one was meant to find it. She flipped through the pages, old transcripts, a half-finished degree in architecture recommendations. She'd never used sketches she did late at night when her mind wouldn't stop. She traced her finger over one rough pencil line, a building that didn't yet exist. Not in this city, not in this life. She closed the folder and slid it back under the loose floorboard beside her mattress. Sleep came late and shallow. In her dreams, glass towers rose and fell like waves, always just out of reach. And somewhere in those shifting lines was a shadow, leaning against a door frame, watching her with eyes that did not look away. The next night, she tried to stay away from the executive floor. She forced herself to clean the lower levels, first emptying bins and scrubbing restroom sinks until her fingers pruned under the gloves. But the clock would not stop. Near midnight, she found herself standing at the bottom of the staircase that led up to the floor with the view. One flight up, one small door with his name on the brass plate. She told herself she would not do it, but her feet moved before her mind could protest. The hallway was dim and silent. His office door was closed. She pressed her palm flat to the wood for just a second, letting herself feel the grain beneath her skin. Then she turned to leave, but the handle clicked. The door cracked open. David Cross stood there, tie-loosened sleeves rolled up, like he had not left that desk all day. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked, if anything, like he had been waiting. Neither spoke at first. He stepped aside. She hesitated, staring past him to the big window and the skyline pulsing in quiet lights. She shook her head, backing away. "You don't have to clean in here tonight," he said softly. "I know," she whispered. His voice dropped lower, calm but heavy, like he was talking to himself as much as to her. "Then stay, just for a minute." She almost laughed at that, a laugh that would have cracked like glass. Stay. Like she had ever belonged anywhere long enough to be invited to stay. But something in his face held her there. Something unguarded, tired, almost honest in a way no one else ever let her see. So she stepped inside. She didn't sit this time. She stood by the wide glass, staring at the city below them. He stood a few feet behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold hush of the office. "What do you see?" he asked. She let out a slow breath that fogged the window for a heartbeat. "I see what I want to build." He stepped closer, his reflection hovering behind hers in the glass. "Tell me." She shook her head again, the words caught between her ribs. But he waited, and the quiet between them filled up with something like trust. "I wanted to design places people felt safe in, not just glass and metal, corners with light, rooms that breathe. I wanted to build something that makes people feel like they matter when they stand inside it." He was so close now she could see the faint line of stubble on his jaw in the window's reflection, the way his eyes softened when she spoke. He didn't look at her like a cleaner. He looked at her like an answer he hadn't realized he was searching for. "And why didn't you?" His question cut through the hum of the city. "Because life doesn't care about dreams when the rent is late and your brother needs shoes." Her voice cracked on the word brother. She blinked fast, fighting the heat rising behind her eyes. David's hand lifted like he might reach for her shoulder, then fell back to his side. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. "You're not invisible," he said quietly. Ella let out a soft, broken laugh. "To you, maybe." "To me," he said, and the certainty in his voice made her chest ache in a place she thought she'd buried. For a long moment, neither moved. The window between them and the city caught the echo of something they could both feel, but not name. Yet the soft, impossible truth that maybe she wasn't alone in her quiet longing. When she finally turned, his eyes were waiting for hers. They stood there in that big empty room, the boss and the maid with a secret blueprint between them that neither of them could unsee now. When she left, she did not take the back stairs. She walked down the main hallway with her head held higher than it had been in years. David watched her go, hands loose at his sides, mind already rewriting every line of the tower she didn't yet know she was about to change. The days that followed blurred together, stitched at the seams by late nights and unfinished coffee. Ella's routine did not change on the surface. She still clocked in just before the building emptied out, still tied her hair back in that same tight knot, still pulled on the cheap gloves that barely protected her hands from harsh chemicals. But inside, something small and defiant had woken up. It hummed quietly beneath her ribs every time she passed that door at the end of the hall. She told herself she wouldn't stop again. She lied to herself every night. One Wednesday near midnight, she found herself back at his office without meaning to be. The lights were on. She heard the low murmur of his voice before she saw him on a call with someone whose words she couldn't hear. She almost turned back, but something in her chest tightened like a knot that refused to loosen. She lingered by the door, pretending to polish the brass nameplate. Through the narrow gap, she could see him leaning back in his chair, tied, discarded white shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His expression was serious, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door, like he knew she was there. When he finally hung up, he didn't call her in. He just got up, crossed the room, and pulled the door open. They stood inches apart again. Neither spoke first. The silence did all the speaking for them. "You keep finding your way back here," he said softly, his voice low enough that the hum of the city outside seemed louder than him. "You keep leaving the light on," she shot back before she could stop herself. She looked down quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. He laughed under his breath, not mocking, just surprised by her honesty. And then he stepped aside wordlessly, inviting her in. This time, she did sit not at the desk, but on the wide leather bench by the window. She perched at the edge, hands folded tight in her lap, to keep them from trembling. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the carafe on the side table and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. Her heart stumbled over itself. He sat across from her, not behind the big desk that made him untouchable, but close enough that their knees nearly touched. For a moment, neither spoke. The room smelled of warm paper and dark roast of rain-soaked concrete drifting in from the cracked window. She stared at the city lights below, how they flickered like promises she hadn't dared make herself. "You shouldn't be here," she said, finally breaking the quiet. Her voice was softer than she wanted it to be. "Neither should you," he countered. There was a smile ghosting at the corner of his mouth, something warm and careful, like he was learning how to smile just for her. "But here we are." She swallowed, fingers tightening around the warm mug. "If someone sees, then let them see," he said, too fast, too certain. His words hit something inside her that she had buried beneath night shifts and unpaid bills, and the quiet resignation that people like her never got to be seen at all. She laughed once, but it cracked like thin ice. "That's easy for you to say." He set his cup down. His hand brushed against hers again, this time lingering. "You're right. It is. And it shouldn't be." The hum between them shifted. Something unspoken, delicate as spun glass, hovered in the space where his thumb traced the inside of her wrist. She felt her pulse there, insistent and fragile. "You shouldn't be cleaning floors," he said suddenly, the words pushed out like a confession. "You shouldn't be here at midnight wiping windows while the city sleeps." She met his eyes, ready to fire back something about rent, about reality, about the little brother who still needed new shoes. But the words fell away when she saw how he was looking at her, like her entire story was scrawled on the walls of this room and he was trying to read every line. "I know about the folder," he said softly. Her breath caught. "You weren't supposed to." "I know," he interrupted. "I shouldn't have looked. But I did." A flush of panic washed over her, shame and anger and embarrassment tangling into a knot in her throat. She tried to pull her hand back, but he didn't let go. "Not tight, just steady." It's just old papers," she stammered. "Just dreams that don't, they do." He cut in, his voice firmer now, like stone under silk. "They do matter. They matter to me." She stared at him, searching for the lie. She found none. Just tired honesty and something softer behind his eyes that she hadn't let herself hope for. Not from him. Not from anyone. He leaned forward, closing the space between them until she could feel his breath warm and careful. His forehead nearly touched hers, and she felt his hand cradle her wrist, where her pulse fluttered, as if he was memorizing it. "You want to design places that make people feel safe," he whispered. "Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how long it's been since anyone in this company thought about what a building could mean to the people inside it?" She couldn't look away. Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I've been staring at numbers and glass and profit margins for so long I forgot buildings aren't just boxes," he went on. "You reminded me. You—" He stopped, the words catching like a secret he was afraid to say out loud. "You make me want to build something different." Her heart thundered in her chest. "David." She began, his name tasting unfamiliar and dangerous on her tongue. But he didn't kiss her. He didn't move closer. He just held her gaze, like a promise. "Come back tomorrow night," he said so quietly she almost missed it. Why, she breathed. "Because I want to show you something," he said. His thumb brushed her wrist again, and it felt like the smallest spark in the darkest room. She stood slowly, pulling her hand free, but not stepping back. Their eyes stayed locked until the city lights blurred behind her. When she slipped out the door, her legs felt shaky, her lungs tight. But inside her chest, that defiant spark burned a little brighter than before. As she left, she did not look back. She didn't have to. She knew he was standing there in the quiet, watching her go, holding a piece of her dream, like it was already half built. The next night, Ella arrived earlier than usual, her hands trembling inside the pockets of her thin coat as she crossed the marble lobby. The security guard barely glanced up when she swiped in with her faded badge. To him, she was invisible, a ghost slipping through polished glass and steel. But tonight she did not feel invisible. Not quite. She took the back elevator up, riding alone in the hush of soft overhead lights and the low hum of hidden cables. When the doors opened, the hallway felt different, warmer somehow. The same corridor she had polished 1,000 times now held a secret only she and David shared. His office door stood ajar, golden light spilling into the dark hall like an invitation. She hesitated in the threshold, brushing her fingertips over the seam of her coat to steady herself. Then she knocked once, softly. He looked up from behind his desk. He was waiting for her sleeves rolled up again, hair slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hand through it 100 times while pacing. Papers were spread out everywhere, blueprints and renderings layered like a puzzle only he could solve. "You came," he said. He sounded relieved, like he'd been afraid she wouldn't. "You asked me to?" She replied, her voice too small for the cavernous room. He stood and walked around the desk, stopping when they were only a step apart. There was a moment, a heartbeat, when it seemed like he might reach for her hand again. Instead, he gestured toward the plans. "Sit," he said gently. "I want to show you something." She perched on the edge of the leather chair, feeling out of place with her cleaning gloves still sticking out of her coat pocket. He spread the drawings in front of her, floor plans, elevations, notes scrawled in the margins. She saw her own handwriting mixed among his reminders and sketches she had tucked into her folder long ago. "I found these," he said. "I had no right, but I couldn't stop reading. You see things differently, Ella. You look at a wall and think about who might need to lean on it when they're tired. You look at a hallway and wonder if someone's going to feel safe walking down it alone at night." She felt her cheeks warm. "It's just ideas. I never finished school. It doesn't matter now." "It does," he insisted, voice low, but certain. He leaned closer, his hands braced on the table, his eyes locked on hers. "You matter. What you see, what you dream, it matters." She laughed once, but it cracked apart in her throat. "I mop floors. I clean your trash cans. And you still see more than half the architects I pay 6 figures to impress me," he said. There was no bite in his tone, just raw truth. He pointed at a sketch she had done on the back of a supply invoice, an atrium with light streaming through tall windows, benches curved around planters. Her notes in the corner read, "A place to rest, somewhere to breathe." "You drew this," he said. "What if we built it?" Her heart stuttered. "Don't say that. Don't I mean it?" His hand hovered over hers, close enough to feel the warmth but not quite touching. "You've been working for me for months and I didn't see you. Now I can't unsee you. I don't want to." The confession sat between them, quiet but alive. "David," she whispered. Saying his name again felt like stepping off a ledge. "Ella," he said, hers like a promise. Then, softer, "You changed the way I see this place. You changed me." He straightened, pushing aside the drawings and pulling another folder from his desk. He opened it carefully and slid it across to her. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick stock company letterhead crisp at the top. She stared at the bold words, halfway down the page, Junior design consultant, probationary contract. Her name was typed neatly below. Her breath caught. What is this? It's not charity, he said quickly, reading the panic on her face. You've done more work than half the people upstairs ever have. I'm giving you a chance to finish what you started. You'd be part-time at first. Paid. Properly. Her hand shook as she touched the edge of the paper. I don't know if I can. You can, he said. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. And you won't do it alone. She looked up at him, the weight of years of disappointment pressing down on her ribs. Why are you doing this for me? He didn't smile. He just searched her eyes, then said softly, Because no one did it for me when I needed it. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible in a room you built with your own hands. Her eyes burned. She tried to look away, but he tilted his head, catching her gaze, holding it steady. You don't owe me anything, he said, but if you want this, if you want a chance to stand in the light for once, instead of cleaning up after everyone else's mess, I'm here. I'll fight for you. The walls seemed to fade around them, the city outside humming like a lullaby she hadn't dared hope for. She felt the truth of it, not just the offer, but the way he looked at her, as if he'd already decided her future deserved more than a mop bucket and empty hallways. She nodded, unable to speak. His smile came slow, careful, like a sunrise after too many nights without sleep. Good, he murmured. His hand brushed hers again, this time resting there just a moment longer than it needed to. Outside, the city moved on, bright and careless, but inside that room the world felt smaller, closer possible. The first week felt like stepping into a dream she wasn't ready to claim. Ella traded her mop bucket for a battered laptop David found in storage. He told her it was hers now, but she kept the cleaning gloves folded in her bag like a safety net just in case someone came and told her it had all been a mistake. During the day, she still cleaned the empty offices, partly by choice. It felt safer, familiar, the rhythmic drag of the mop grounding her when her mind raced ahead to the plans she sketched in the corners of her notebook. But at night, when the top floors emptied out and only the hum of the city lights remained, she would find herself back at David's office. He was always there. Sometimes pacing the floor in his rolled-up sleeves and undone tie, sometimes perched on the edge of his desk with his shoes off and a pencil tucked behind his ear. He made the towering glass and cold marble feel like a studio instead of a fortress. One night she found him asleep at his desk, head resting on his folded arms. She paused in the doorway, a stack of her notes clutched to her chest, her breath catching at the sight of him. Like that powerful yet utterly human. She stepped closer, careful not to wake him, but his eyes fluttered open as soon as she brushed against the corner of the table. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. He lifted his head slowly, blinking the sleep from his eyes. Then he smiled, a quiet, sleepy thing that made something deep inside her soften in a way she hadn't expected. Don't be sorry, he said, voice rough with exhaustion. You're the only reason I get any sleep at all these days. She laughed under her breath, embarrassed. I doubt that. He sat up straighter, raking a hand through his hair. You keep me honest, Ella. Before you, it was just me in a building full of people who said yes to everything, no matter how bad the idea. Now I have you to say maybe there's a better way. She ducked her head, flipping through her papers to hide the flush on her cheeks. Speaking of better ways, I think I figured out the stairwell access problem. If we reroute the north corridor, we can add a skylight without compromising the fire exit. She laid the drawing in front of him. He leaned in so close she could smell the faint trace of his aftershave and coffee. His arm brushed hers as he pointed to a corner of the page. This, he murmured. This is what I mean. You see things differently. Their heads nearly touched as they studied the paper. She felt her pulse flutter, her breath catching each time he spoke softly. His lips so close to her ear, she wondered if he could hear her heart stammering in response. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The soft tick of the wall clock filled the quiet, and somewhere deep in the building a heater kicked on, humming warm air through the vents. She shifted just an inch, but it brought her knee against his under the table. Neither of them pulled away. He turned his head, their foreheads almost brushing. "Ella," he started, then stopped, the word hanging between them like an unfinished promise. She met his eyes, searching for something safe to say. But there was nothing safe about this. The closeness, the way the world outside seemed to vanish when he looked at her like that. She pulled back first, her chair scraping the floor too loudly in the hush of the room. He didn't stop her. He only sat back, his hands falling to his lap, fingers threading together like he was holding on to something invisible. I should get back to the break room," she said. "Finish up my notes." He nodded once, the shadows under his eyes deeper now. "Of course. Just don't work too late, okay?" She nodded, gathering her papers with hands that wouldn't quite steady. At the door she paused, turning back to find him watching her with that same look, open, unguarded, like she'd cracked him wide in a place he thought was all stone and steel. "Good night, David," she whispered. He smiled, small but real. "Good night, Ella." The next few nights they danced around it, the closeness, the soft hesitations. She'd come in with new sketches, he'd offer her tea in a chipped mug that he'd started keeping just for her. Sometimes they'd work side by side until dawn painted the sky outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, two people sharing a room that felt like a bridge between their separate worlds. One night she found a blanket folded on the small couch in the corner of his office. When she looked at him in question, he shrugged. "In case you ever need to rest. I know it's not much." She wanted to say it was too much, the offer, the softness, the way he made this cold place feel like it might hold warmth if she let it. But instead, she only knotted her throat tight, with words she wasn't ready to say. The next evening it was raining when she arrived. She stood by the window watching water streak down the glass in silver rivers. He came up behind her close, but not touching, his reflection hovering next to hers in the dark pane. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "what it would be like if things were different? If we had met somewhere else? Not here. Not like this." She turned, startled by the rawness in his voice. His eyes were tired but kind. His smile faint, but real. "Would you have seen me then?" she asked. "I don't think I could have missed you," he said. Then softer, "I'm not missing you now." The words pressed into her ribs like a promise she didn't know how to hold. She didn't answer, not with words, not yet. But when he reached for her hand, she let him take it. Just for a moment. Just enough to feel the truth of it pulsing warm between their palms. By the second month, the line between late-night work sessions and something more had blurred so softly that neither Ella nor David could say exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the night he found her asleep at his desk, her cheek pressed to a stack of design sketches, a pencil still tucked behind her ear. He hadn't woken her, just draped his suit jacket over her shoulders and worked quietly by lamplight until dawn. Or maybe it was the morning she found two mugs waiting for her, one with exactly the amount of milk she always stirred in but never asked for. The building changed too. People noticed. Rumors flickered like soft sparks in the hallways. Some staff whispered that the CEO spent more time on the top floor now that the janitor who once scrubbed the marble tiles was seen in the boardroom with blueprints spread before her like a throne. Ella ignored the whispers as best she could. She still clocked in at the side door every evening, still kept her ID badge clipped low, still wiped down doorknobs and emptied trash bins before she let herself climb to the top floor, where her true work waited. One night after the others had gone home, she stood with David in the empty conference room, her drawings pinned to the wall with yellow tape pages of notes scattered across the polished table. He leaned against the far end, sleeves rolled up, watching her with the faintest smile that tugged at the corners of his tired eyes. "You realize," he said, voice low, "if you keep this up, I'm going to have to put your name on half the blueprints for this project." She shook her head, a shy smile breaking through the exhaustion. "It's still yours. I'm just helping." "You're not just helping." He pushed off the table and crossed to stand beside her, so close she felt the warmth of him through the thin fabric of her shirt. "You're changing it. You're changing everything." She held her breath as he reached out, one hand hovering over the fresh lines she'd drawn that evening. New corridors, a public space where sunlight would pour through angled glass. She hadn't dared imagine it would ever be more than sketches until he told her to make it real. She glanced up, found him watching her instead of the paper. His gaze traced her face the same way it used to trace the outlines of architectural models and investment projections carefully, reverently, like he knew every detail mattered. She stepped back first, clearing her throat. I should get these organized. I promised the contractor the first drafts by Monday. He didn't stop her, but his eyes stayed on her until she ducked her head, gathering the loose pages into a stack, hugging them tight to her chest, like a shield. Ella, he said suddenly, his voice softer now, almost raw. She paused. What? Stay a while tonight. She looked at him, surprise flickering through the fatigue. Stay? He nodded. We've been working so late you hardly sleep. I see it. Just sit with me. No work tonight. No blueprints. Just, he hesitated, searching for the right word. Just be here. She almost said no. Instinct told her she didn't belong in the soft places of this building, only the hard corners she could scrub clean. But the way he stood there, sleeves pushed up, tie forgotten on the chair behind him, hair falling forward over his brow, she didn't have the strength to refuse. So they sat on the floor beside the long window that looked out over the city. She leaned against the glass, knees drawn to her chest, and he sat cross-legged opposite her, 2 paper cups of tea balanced between them. They talked about everything except the company, except the work. He asked about her favorite books, the songs her mother used to hum while folding laundry, the way she learned to draw by copying floor plans from magazines she found in recycling bins. When she asked him what he would do if he weren't the CEO, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her as if she'd just handed him a puzzle too fragile to solve. Maybe, he said, finally I'd build something small. A bookstore, maybe. Somewhere quiet. A place people come to sit and breathe. She laughed softly. You'd run a bookstore? His smile tugged crooked. Maybe. And you? She hugged her knees closer, gaze dropping to the lights below them. I'd draw houses for people who never thought they could own one. Little ones, cozy ones, windows that catch the morning sun. He watched her like her words were something precious. Then he reached out, hesitated, and brushed his fingers lightly over the back of her hand where it rested on her knee. I think you already build things like that, he said. Even here. You make people believe in places that feel like home. She didn't trust her voice enough to reply. Instead, she let her hand turn slowly until her fingers slipped between his. His thumb traced a small circle against her knuckle, tentative but certain in its own quiet promise. They sat like that while the city breathed below them. No deals, no titles, no lines drawn to separate who they were from who they might become if they were brave enough to keep choosing each other when the lights came on again. When the clock on the wall ticked past 2, she shifted her voice, barely a whisper. I should go. His hand squeezed hers once before letting go. I know. But when she stood, he did too, following her to the door as if to make sure she'd really come back tomorrow, as if some part of him still didn't believe any of this was real. At the threshold, she turned, her heart drumming too fast to contain. Good night, David. His smile was small, but his eyes told her more than any words could. Good night, Ella. The following week tested every fragile promise that night had left hanging in the quiet air between them. Deadlines loomed like storm clouds. The redesign for the flagship tower hit unexpected delays when a major supplier backed out, and news of it leaked just enough to rattle the board. Meetings stretched into the early hours, the office lights never fully dark. Ella found herself running on caffeine and hope sleeping in hour-long scraps on the break room couch when David forced her to close her eyes at all. He didn't say it outright, but she saw it the way he carried the weight for both of them. Every call with the contractors ended with his jaw tight, his voice measured, eyes flicking over to where she sat scribbling notes she'd never let him see. She watched him manage the panic of men who wore $5,000 watches and worried more about quarterly figures than the people who made them happen. One night, deep past midnight, she found him alone in the glass conference room, staring at the city through the rain-slicked window, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. She hesitated in the doorway, torn between pretending not to see and stepping closer. You should sleep, she said gently. He didn't turn. So should you. She padded in on bare feet, her sneakers left somewhere near her cleaning cart hours ago. The rain blurred the skyline into streaks of neon and gold behind him. They're nervous, he said, after a moment, his voice so low it barely carried. They think I'm gambling too much on something no one else believes in. Then they've forgotten who you are, Ella said. He looked at her over his shoulder, eyes tired but so alive when they met hers. Who am I then? She stepped closer until her reflection merged with his in the window's cold glass. You're the man who sees what's possible before anyone else does. The one who gave someone like me a chance to stand here and say that out loud. He let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh but cracked at the edges. Someone like you? She nodded. Invisible. Replaceable. Until you didn't let me be. He turned fully, then setting the glass down, the faintest echo of crystal against marble. You were never invisible, Ella. I was just blind. They stood there a moment, the hum of the city vibrating through the glass at their backs. She reached out unsure and laid her hand over his on the windowsill. His fingers curled around hers, instantly warm and steady, like a promise he didn't have to say out loud. He squeezed once. Go home tonight. Get real sleep. She smiled tiredly. I could say the same to you. You could. He agreed. He didn't let go. But you won't. A soft laugh escaped her. She looked down at their hands. We'll get through this. You know that, right? His thumb traced her knuckles. I know. Because you're here. Neither of them moved to pull away until the rain slowed to a soft drizzle and the night shift cleaners shuffled by in the corridor, glancing in with curiosity they'd never dare voice. The next morning, an internal memo confirmed the supplier issue was resolved. David's team credited his relentless negotiation, but the quiet truth was that Ella had spent the night drafting an alternative plan, cheaper, smarter, and faster, and had slipped it under his door before she finally went home to shower and return, like she'd never left. No one saw her do it. No one needed to. But when he caught her eye in the hallway that afternoon, his nod was enough. Days blurred together after that. They lived on caffeine and late dinners cobbled together from vending machines and lukewarm takeout. He made sure she ate, slipping her half of his sandwich before she could refuse. She made sure he rested, stealing his phone from his hand once, when he nodded off at his desk, setting it on silent so no call would wake him for at least a few minutes. One evening in the dim hush of the top floor, she paused at his door to say goodnight, but he surprised her. He crossed the room, took her wrist gently, and asked if she'd stay a little longer. They didn't talk about work. They sat side by side on the couch in his office, sharing stale cookies from the break room and memories they'd never told anyone else. He told her about the first building he ever sketched, a crooked treehouse he tried to build in his parents' backyard, with scraps of plywood and a dream bigger than his young hands could hold. She told him about nights spent awake in the tiny apartment where her mother worked 3 jobs, where she learned to fix what was broken because no one else would. At some point, the soft hush of conversation faded. She leaned her head against his shoulder, meaning only to rest for a moment. He didn't move, didn't speak, just turned his face into her hair, breathing her in like he needed that small proof she was real. When she woke hours later, his arm was still around her, the city beyond the window beginning to glow with the promise of morning. She shifted, trying not to wake him, but his voice caught her rough with sleep. Stay, he murmured, half dreaming. She did. In the days that followed, they were careful, or tried to be. But something had shifted. A glance lingered too long. Fingers brushed when passing files back and forth. Small touches meant nothing in boardrooms, but everything once the doors closed. And beneath it all, the work continued, their secret blueprint for a building, and for something else neither dared to name yet. It wasn't the city's headlines or the balance sheets that drove them forward now. It was the late hours, the coffee gone cold between them, the promise that if they could build this together, this project, this trust, maybe they could build 1,000 quiet things no boardroom could ever tear down. The day the final approval came down felt almost anticlimactic at first. There was no grand announcement, no balloons or confetti, just an early morning email stamped urgent from the board. The project was greenlit, the funding secured. The last stubborn vote flipped in their favor, after weeks of delicate maneuvering that Ella suspected had more to do with David's quiet influence than any pitch deck. She sat at her old desk, still tucked behind the supply room, where she had once hidden her cleaning cart, staring at the confirmation for a full minute before it sank in. Around her, the hum of the office carried on as if nothing had changed, but for Ella, everything had shifted. She didn't feel like she was standing on someone else's floor anymore. She felt like she had built part of it with her own hands. David found her there an hour later. He paused in the doorway, leaning against the frame like he had so many times before when he came looking for her in the quiet corners of the building. "It's done," he said simply. She looked up, caught the glimmer in his eyes that the polished mask of CEO could never fully hide when he was around her. She nodded, unable to keep the grin from breaking through her careful calm. "It's done," she echoed. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. The hum of the hallway fell away. "You did this," he said, crossing the few feet between them. "We did this," she corrected, shaking her head. "You fought for me before I even knew how to fight for myself. You gave me the space to be what he asked," his voice softer now, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the stack of revised blueprints. "To be seen," she said, her breath catching. "To matter." He studied her face like he was trying to memorize the way her eyes held his. "You always mattered. I just got lucky enough to notice." She felt the air shift, the hush of something bigger than gratitude or pride. She could have stepped back. She didn't. Neither did he. Outside the closed door, the floor buzzed with normal life meetings called deadlines, whispered phones ringing unanswered for the briefest seconds. Inside, there was just them and the soft thud of her heart keeping time with his. He lifted her hand gently, turned her wrist, pressed his lips to the thin line of skin where her pulse beat steady and sure. She didn't move, didn't flinch. The tiny moment stole the breath from her lungs. "I should thank you," he murmured, voice so low only she could hear it, "for reminding me what all this is for." She could have spoken, but there were no words for how her chest tightened at that. Instead, she laid her other hand over his, grounding him to her, the same way he had grounded her 100 sleepless nights. Someone knocked suddenly sharp and practical on the door. They startled just enough to break the spell. She stepped back, tucking her hair behind her ear. He didn't look away, not even when he called out for them to wait. She gathered the files quickly, heartbeat still stuttering in her chest. He lingered by the door, watching her with something that felt dangerously close to longing, or maybe it was just relief. Either way, she felt it. When the door opened again, they were back in their roles, CEO and lead project analyst, all calm nods and professional distance. But the air hummed with the ghost of the moment they'd just shared. The day carried on in a blur of meetings. People clapped him on the back in elevators, congratulated her in passing, without quite understanding why. The board called an impromptu celebration in the main hall that evening, catered trays, polite speeches, a ceremonial toast. Ella stood by the far wall, glass of water in hand, half listening to the praises that had very little to do with the real reason this project had survived. When David spoke, his words were sharp and polished, but when his eyes found hers across the room, she saw what he really meant. He didn't talk about numbers or shareholders. He talked about vision and trust, and building something that would outlast the people in the room. She felt every word in her bones. Later, when the crowd began to thin, and the catering staff packed up the leftover pastries, he found her in the corner, again half hidden behind a marble column. "Are you hiding?" he asked with a crooked smile. She shrugged her fingers, brushing the rim of her glass. "Just breathing." He stepped closer, shielding her from the last stragglers, drifting toward the exits. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She didn't need to ask what he meant. She shook her head. No. Not a second. Do you? He reached out slowly, his knuckles brushing hers, where her hand rested against the cold stone. Not for a second. A beat passed, then another. She felt the pull between them quiet, but undeniable. But the hall was still too full of lingering eyes and polite chatter. "Walk with me," he asked. She didn't hesitate. They left through the side exit coats thrown over their arms, the city night crisp and clean. He led her to the edge of the courtyard, where the first beams of the new tower would soon rise. The place they'd sketched on paper 1,000 times, but now felt more real than any drawing. He stopped by the fence, looking out at the empty lot that in a year would hold their work, their name in ways neither of them would claim alone. She shivered slightly when the wind caught her hair. Without a word, he stepped behind her, draping his coat over her shoulders. His hands lingered there warm against her arms. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. His voice brushed the back of her neck when he spoke. "Thank you for cleaning up my messes," he said quietly. She laughed under her breath, eyes stinging a little in the cold. "And thank you for giving me one worth making better." He leaned closer, then so close she could feel the shape of his smile against her hair. "This is just the start, Ella," he whispered. She let her eyes close, felt the hum of the city, the promise of steel and glass yet to rise, and the quiet promise of something softer, warmer, just for them. The first steel beams rose at dawn 3 weeks later. Ella stood at the edge of the construction zone in a borrowed hard hat and a neon vest 2 sizes too big. The ground was wet from an overnight rain, but the sunrise broke through in streaks of gold that caught the fresh metal and made it glow like something alive. Beside her, David sipped bad coffee from a paper cup, his suit jacket traded for a weathered leather coat that looked older than any boardroom rumor about him. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. They watched in silence as the crane lifted each beam into place, the clatter of steel and shouted instructions echoing down the empty street. At some point his hand found hers where it hid in her coat pocket. Neither of them looked at it, but they didn't pull away either. When the first crew break came, he turned to her, voice low and warm under the rumble of machinery. "This is really happening," he said. She nodded, unable to hide her smile. "It is." "You built it." He shook his head, eyes locked on hers. "We built it, and we're going to keep building it." Later, when the site emptied for the day, they lingered behind. The noise was gone, replaced by the hush of dusk settling over steel bones and fresh concrete. Ella traced her fingers along the edge of the temporary fencing, her mind drifting back to the nights she'd stayed hidden in back rooms, believing this kind of day belonged to people whose names were already stamped on polished doors. David leaned against one of the posts, arms crossed, watching her with that look that had long since stripped away any polite distance. "You know," he said after a while, his voice threading through the quiet, "I used to think I could do all of this alone. That if I worked hard enough, stayed smart enough, no one could touch it." She turned, caught the faint self-mockery in his smile. And now, he pushed off the fence, stepping closer, until she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling night air. "Now I know the only thing worse than failing alone is succeeding alone." She let that sink in, the truth of it, the way his eyes softened when they rested on hers. "And you?" he asked. "What do you see when you look at all this?" She tilted her head, imagining the steel-turned glass, the empty lot pulsing with life and light and purpose. But when her eyes dropped back to him, none of that mattered half as much as the certainty she found there. "I see a place," she said, her voice steady, "where no one gets swept into a corner or hidden behind a mop bucket. Not if I can help it." His answering smile was slow, reverent. "That's what I hoped you'd say." They stayed like that for a moment longer, city lights flickering to life beyond the site, shadows lengthening as the day slipped towards something softer. When they walked back to the tower entrance, he held the door open for her the way he always had, not as a gesture of power, but of quiet regard. Inside the lobby, lights felt too bright, too polished, but neither of them pulled apart when an early janitor gave them a curious glance. Upstairs, his office was quiet. Papers stacked in neat rows, the ghost of late nights and secret fixes still humming through the room. She set her bag on the chair she'd once tucked herself into when no one else would see her, and for a moment she was that girl again, invisible but full of silent fire. He closed the door behind them, the soft click erasing the world for a heartbeat. She turned to face him, half in shadow, half in the glow of the city spilling through the glass. "You asked me once if I regretted any of this," she said. "I lied when I said no." His brow creased just slightly, that hint of worry that only showed when the mask slipped. "I regret every day I spent thinking I didn't belong here," she whispered. "Every minute I spent telling myself this desk, this building, this chance, it was never mine." He stepped forward, hands resting at her hips like he was steadying something fragile. "And now?" he asked. She lifted her chin, eyes fierce and bright. "Now I know I built it, and I'm not leaving." A breath, a heartbeat, and then his lips found hers, not rushed, not desperate, but deep and certain. The kiss tasted of cold city air and warm rooms of steel rising, and quiet nights when they'd shared coffee over silent screens. When they broke apart, she laughed softly against his mouth, breathless, but sure. "You're really bad at keeping things professional." "You know," she teased. He grinned, forehead resting against hers. "And you're really bad at staying hidden." They lingered in that hush, letting the weight of years and hours and hidden truths settle into something softer, something real. Eventually she pulled back just enough to look at the desk behind him, the same desk where she'd once slipped her resume into a drawer and wondered if anyone would ever care enough to find it. "Still think you can do all this alone?" she asked. His answer was the press of his lips to her temple, the warmth of his hands at her waist, the promise buried in a whisper only she could hear. Never again. Outside, the city kept moving, lights flickered, trains rattled, people hurried through their own small storms. But here in this quiet room, something unshakable had taken root between steel and glass, and late nights turned into something more. And when they stepped out together side by side, they carried it with them into every corridor, every boardroom, every blueprint yet to be drawn. Because some buildings rise from concrete and iron, but some, the ones that last, rise from people who refuse to be unseen. And two hands steady and sure held the proof that sometimes the ones who sweep the corners clean are the same ones who build the corner office and fill it with love that refuses to be hidden ever again.